excited to join the session with you today. And then maybe Arushi.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Shirley and Eli. I'm Arushi Surve. I go to Georgia Tech. I'm a freshman in college, and I run my own nonprofit, Mission Green Global. I'm also part of the World Ocean Day, United Nations Ocean Decade, and Future Blue Youth Councils. I'm also the co-chair of member engagement at UNA USA Youth, and I am really interested in climate work. And yeah, super excited to be here and co-lead this session.
Then our facilitator, last but not least, Grace. We're just doing introductions around.
Hello, everyone. My name is Grace Okubo. I'm a futures practitioner from Nigeria. I'm also a designer. I'm excited to be part of this session. I'm looking forward to learning and building future worlds together with everyone.
Then we can maybe delegate someone else to do it. Grace, do you want to delegate someone to do the intro?
Okay, so um, all right. Our topic is who gets to imagine the future, designing systems of belonging through the power of storytelling. And in this session, what we're going to do is we're going to move from imagining it to a practical session using dystopian tropes as a diagnostic tool. So we're going to ask a very simple question: who imagines the future and who belongs in it? And with that, I'm going to hand over to Arushi, who has something to share with us about dystopian narratives.
Sorry.
Awesome. Before I start, can we share the screen so that we can follow
Yeah,
through with the presentation we have made?
I'm gonna see if I can get that going.
Awesome. I have it opened up, so okay.
Oh, okay.
Perfect.
Is this
Sorry. You can
I
do
like?
it if you want.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
We good?
here. Perfect. Um, Awesome. So I'll be talking about kind of introducing what dystopia is. Already, Grace gave us the introduction of our session today. It's going to be very themed on dystopian narratives and how we can kind of look at books, TV shows, movies that have given these ideas about dystopia and use them to influence our vision for a world future day or a better future. So, starting with dystopia, you might have seen famous movies like The Hunger Games, Maze Runner, or read books like 1984, Fahrenheit 451. These are all books and movies and shows that kind of have the same central topic, talking about a future where something is kind of wrong. It's like the opposite of a utopia. It's something that's a little dangerous, something off centered. It's always moving in a more negative direction than what humanity is used to, and it's often correlated with the destruction of humanity. So today's session, Eli, if you could hit the next slide, is going to be talking about dystopia as a diagnostic tool. So we have three kind of main parts of our presentation, and the topic of hand today. The first one is power in dystopia. We're going to be talking about who is in power, what it means for governments or for society to hold that power, and how that gets distributed a little bit unequally in a way that affects society and is why what leads to kind of dystopian worlds. So, for example, in Hunger Games, the main capital is the one with the power, and that causes other districts around them to kind of be in peril as they are forced to succumb under the power and pressure of the main capital, the main organizers of the Hunger Games, and their president Snow. So that's a little bit about power. The second one is exclusion. In kind of, we see 1984 or The Maze Runner, it's all about exclusion of certain people, of certain races, of certain genders, kind of they're withdrawn from society so that the people in power stay in power. And also, this causes a more divided society which is a huge aspect of dystopia. The third thing we're going to be looking at is the design choices when building a dystopia versus a utopia. Can you hit the next slide, Eli? Awesome. So, what kind of is the main factors of a dystopia? The first one is algorithmic governance. So, for example, in 1984, there's like a lot of like surveillance and kind of governance that's like very much more invading the privacy of citizens. The second one is climate displacement, which we can sort of see in the Maze Runner, where their world is clashing and kind of dying out because it's overthrown by zombies and diseases. The third one is surveillance infrastructure. The fourth one is biometric identity. And the fifth one is automated welfare scoring. So we're going to be looking at all five of these topics into great depth and kind of seeing at how we can change these, fix these, or alter these in order to change what would be called a dystopia into a utopia, into a better world future. Now we're talking about the world we built. In this session, our main kind of goal is to explore these topics in a more interactive session. So we'll be discussing who benefits from the ideal world that we built, who's excluded, so we make sure that instead of society remaining divided, it remains united, who designs the system, and who maintains the system.
So this is a session we're discussing how to move from diagnosis to design. We've just learned about dystopian tropes and the themes that dystopian tropes explore. So in this session, what we're going to do is, in small groups, we're going to design one intervention inside the dystopian world that we've just explored. And the goal is to imagine something that reduces hate or expands belonging, creates a sense of belonging in a dystopian world. And you can choose from any of the domains that is relevant to you, either from housing, governance, digital systems for education, or from any system that you feel comfortable with or you have familiar with, or you're familiar with. Next slide, please. So African science fiction is is a very popular tool used by African science speculative fiction writers to explore dystopian worlds, because for these writers, they are creating from systems that they are already familiar with, which is broken down systems and collapsed structures. So when African writers are imagining what they are creating tropes that explore current challenges in a future state. So examples are from this very popular, one of the pioneering science speculative fiction magazine, Luminana, where writers from Lagos, Accra, and from South Africa, and from other African countries, create speculative fiction that combine both science fiction tropes with local mythologies, because cultural identity is important to Africans, and so they cannot separate it from the stories they create about the future. So in your own practice of creating dystopian stories, it's important to include the values and some of the cultural tropes that your people are familiar with, so that they can resonate with them. Next slide, please. Okay, so in imagining the future, there are a couple of rules that we will follow. First of all, it has to be conceptual. We don't have to go into too many details of what your prototype is all about. It also has to be inside the dystopia. Like your solution should not be outside of the dystopia that you're creating. You should also reduce hate, because this is the theme that we're exploring. We're trying to reduce hate and angst amongst people and create belonging. So we should create breakout groups now to imagine simple prototypes for a dystopian world, for a trope that you're familiar or conversant with.
I'm not too sure who's gonna be creating the breakout rooms, but given that we don't have a lot of people here, should we just get people to maybe think about it themselves?
Okay, so like,
Good idea.
yeah.
Yeah, so should we set maybe like 3 minutes, or do you think 5 minutes would be better?
Let's do four.
Yeah, four. Okay, perfect. Middle ground. Okay, so 4 minutes for everyone to think about designing kind of a prototype to intervene in a dystopia they want to imagine perhaps in the future. And then we'll come and for back for discussion at 23. Just one quick idea. I think it might be easier if we could also share each other's answers. So I created an interactive poll. So if Eli, I can send it to you, and then you can share on the screen, and then everyone can access and put their answers on. Perfect. It should be to your left.
Shirley, if you could put it in the Canva, that would be amazing.
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. 1 second.
Like just add the link onto this slide and I'll
Yeah.
off it.
hmm You can see here.
Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna take the link and put it in the chat, and then we can all.
Yeah. Okay, we give one minute to everyone. Okay, I think that should be enough time. So, does anyone want to share maybe their intervention slash solution to the dystopias that we might be imagining we could have in the future?
Okay, well, I could start and then pass that off to someone else.
Perfect.
So I ended up thinking very much about the pieces of like pop culture that Arushi had just brought up. So I watched Maze Runner a couple months back, and I was thinking that the simplest solution for the whole situation that turns into a dystopia would just be an ideological shift in the people who are being like prosecuted because they have a genetic help that could solve a disease. But if we were as a society to move from personal survival being the core interest to like societal survival and societal change, you wouldn't see so much violence, so much would be the same for what we currently see today. All right, does anyone in the meeting who is not a facilitator want to share?
I can jump in. Hello, everyone. My name is Scott, and I'm currently in Malaysia. What I was thinking about was that in these sorts of situations, often what's strongest is a return to what can be remembered from the old world, if possible, from before the dystopia, and maybe a revival of whether those are the myths or the values or narratives or anything like that that can be, if not recovered, perhaps. I mean, those things are meant to change with time, anyways. So maybe just a remembrance of that, so that that can give hope towards building something better would be an idea.
Nice. And then I will also read out some of the responses we got from the poll. So someone says if there was an ideological shift in the Maze Runner from personal to societal survival, prosecution of the special individuals would instead become collaboration. And then someone else said deep listening between actors of the field. And then we have one more that says united work and greater engagement with one another on the world's issues, climate change, geopolitics, etc. Okay, perfect. And then anyone else that has not responded on the interactive poll or wants to also share their ideas with us before we move on?
I can go for it. If anybody else actually who's not a co-facilitator wants to jump in, more than welcome to before me.
You can go
If
ahead.
not, I'll yeah, I would say definitely thinking more about how we can contribute to the greater good without relying on like government or like systematic change to begin with. I think like we can all do our part. in helping like things move along sometimes. It's like very small changes, but whether it's like climate change and like making sure to turn off the light, not polluting, to kind of being kinder and making change in somebody else's life. I think those are very, very small things that mean so much as to strengthen society as a whole, is what I would say.
Awesome. So should we move on then?
Yes, we can move on.
Perfect.
So here we are exploring what changes in the system without erasing reality, without completely removing the realities of the dystopia. What have we created? And I think with the solutions that we've shared, we've all pointed out one problem or the other that we think that our solutions can address. Next slide.
So now it's my turn, and I think before I start, I will also like to mention that there's another response from someone in the group to our last question. So someone said we would need a revival of our myths and stories to remind us where we came from, then we can restore the flame of hope and find a way forward, or at least a guideline forward. I think it's a really nice response because it adds in nicely with our next point, which is a context test. So does your solution that all of you have just spoken about, your prototypes, little ideas you have about how we can reimagine a better future collaboratively together, does it actually travel across different contexts? So now the task for all of you here is that you need to take what prototype you just had now and apply it to a new cultural context. So the context you choose, it could be any country, maybe you're familiar with, you're not familiar with. It could be Kenya, France, China, your own country, or any country that your group, or in this case, we're just deciding individually, so you decide. Then we're gonna have also minutes for you guys to do a discussion round specifically around these four questions. So you can also talk, you can answer whichever question you want. So what the first thing would be, what would be the key cultural and political features of the country that you have chosen? Right, so giving everyone a bit of background about what's so special about and unique about the context you've chosen. And would the solution that we just discussed before work in a similar way in this context? Why or why not? And particularly with the second question, you can also consider who would trust the prototype you just developed and who would resist, right? The different actors we have in this context. And in another manner, we can also just consider who holds power and tells the story in this context. Okay, so these are just some guiding questions for you guys to have a think about. And before we do this exercise, I will also, can we move on to the next slide, please? I will also give a bit of pointers to the next idea, which is the idea of collective memory and historical storytelling, which links in with one of the prototypes mentioned in the poll. So because we all know that different contexts comes from with different historical memories, different cultural experiences, and also different values that maybe some cultures prioritize and some cultures dismiss, right? So, for example, in Asian context or in African context, there is a stronger emphasis on collective building, collective community building, collaborative decision making. Whereas in the West, it is more a value of independence and critical thinking. Obviously, these are bigger generalizations, but these are some contexts you can take into matters. So the question here becomes, is that what historical experiences, especially in the country you've chosen, can shape trust in institutions here? And also, if adding on to the point about identifying cultural or political features of the context you've chosen, what past conflicts, historical memories, or exclusions might even affect your design, affecting, for example, the mentality and the mindsets of the people and the institutions that are run there. Okay, so does everyone understand the task here? Can you give me a thumbs up if you do? Everyone all good? Perfect. Okay, so now I will leave about, should we say this time, 5 minutes for everyone to complete the task. So if Eli, if you could move the slides to the previous one, please. So everyone can see? Okay, perfect. So 5 minutes. We will reconvene at 36. And again, I will drop the link for the interactive poll in the chat, so you can also type your answers. Okay, perfect. So I think we've hit the 5 minute mark. So before I read out the responses we have in the poll, does anyone want to maybe unmute themselves and then share their perspectives, what cultural context they've chosen, and also how would the prototype work or work differently in this context? If not, I'm gonna read out the responses and maybe I could get someone that have written the responses to explain a bit more about what they mean. Does that sound good? Okay, I'm gonna read it out so that we can maybe discuss together. So the first one we have is in any world where conflict has arisen, it becomes increasingly complicated to convince each party to make peace, while a change in perspective could spare the world much grief. And then it ends there. So whoever wrote this response, do you want to maybe explain what you mean by this answer? Or does anyone have any thoughts on this opinion? If not, we can move on to the next one. No? Okay, we move on. So the second one is my solution is stacked citizenship that allows people to participate economically, culturally, and civically in multiple countries and regions. This solution decreases inter-ethnic conflicts. Okay, so in a sense, minimizing the internal civil conflicts we potentially could have where there is perhaps multi-ethnic components or multilingual components in the region. Okay, that's a very interesting idea. Um, Third one, I think it is hard to put them in the context of one country. The challenge to my solution is whether there is a monoculture or many cultures, which means we either have one strong story or many stories, which again is very true. The idea of having collective memories can exist for multiple cultures in one society, or it could be a very strong monoculture in one. The next one we have is connecting dots and islands of coherence by listening the fields, social organizations, universities, NGOs, entrepreneurs, young and old people, religions, political parties, local and central government. So for me, I think this sounds like this person is trying to advance their prototype by gathering as much information and having conversations with different actors in the society, which would be a good way to also that links to interest as well. Okay, so before I move on, does anyone else have any thoughts or opinions they like to share on the context test we have here? No? Okay, then Eli, can you move on to the next slide, please? The slide after, please. Yes. Okay. So this is just a general test for you to also realize that the power of storytelling has always existed in our society, especially with the idea of having collective phenomenons or collective memories, and in a sense, story building and storytelling together influences how societies, even nowadays, interpret risk and protections. This, because I'm someone that comes from the backgrounds of studying politics and international relations, this is also sometimes used by foreign policy leaders. It becomes narratives of certain communities and societies. So it's very, very powerful idea, and it's very interesting to see how future narratives can become present in our society today. So in the same sense, historical storytelling also defines who is potentially seen and portrayed as a victim, as a hero, or a threat, who is villainized, as we say, or who is victimized. So what feels normal in one society may feel oppressive in another is in the same idea that we've talked about in the interactive pool, where clashing interests or clashing values may become a problem or a potential leeway for solutions to build a collective society in the future. And therefore, the future is imagined through inherited stories that we tell ourselves with from our ancestors to our children to future generations. So this very strong link between the past, present, and future is enhanced through the power of storytelling here, and we can see it with the contextual test we just did. Um, Next slide, please. So, refining our prototype. So, I don't think we have enough time for this, but this could be a very interesting takeaway for all of you to consider after this session today. So, again, being the idea that when we're creating what we think the future may look like, we need to also ask ourselves whose worldview is embedded, right? As the world gets more interconnected every day now. I think it's very important for us to also consider when we're speaking with different people about creating a collective future together, are we being considerate and inclusive with different worldviews, different cultural values, different preferences, priorities, and also historical memories, right? So every design that you have and we all have carries cultural assumptions and biases. So therefore, it's very important for us to identify which assumption your potential prototype or even your ideas about what the future may lead to, this idea of a dystopia or utopia may rely on. Is it about having individual responsibilities or is it collective responsibility? Are we optimistic about the rise of AI and technology, or are we skeptical around it? And also, are we prioritizing certain values like stability over justice or freedom, or the other way around? So, refining your prototype can also help you design a more inclusive and more sustainable version of the future you want. So, now I will hand it over to Eli, I believe.
Yes, all right. So now that we've discussed what collective memory has done, how it has shaped the way that we view the world, the question is, how do our habits and the tools that we use as a society shape what we see tomorrow? So, just a quick overview, specifically with AI, as to what has happened in the past couple of years that is either concerning or helpful with a variety of issues. I'm sure you all know about like the general problems with, say, the environment, with political activism, and AI as a whole, but we end up seeing a lot more, say, like niche situations that cause vast harm to major societies. So, one of the core ones I'd like to focus on is confirmation bias. It's the idea that AI continues to promote the ideas that you attempt to tell it. If you ask someone a question that says, is this statement true? AI will almost all of the time search the internet for information that proves you correct because its only goal in that situation is to appease. We saw this a couple of years ago with James Brooks. He brought a story to CNN about how ChatGPT had convinced him that he created a new kind of math. It led him to a giant rabbit hole that brought him down to quitting his job, dedicating his time specifically towards developing this new scientific study. And eventually, he realized that he wasn't truly being innovative, and he was instead being drawn down this pathway where AI was just bringing him more and more into his own delusion about this idea. Now, we've seen chatbots becoming more like yes men per se, saying that anything you say is correct, and this ends up creating more and more problems with mental health. We've seen specifically in youth that talking to these chatbots, especially when they feel problems at school or with their relationships, leads to more mental health issues because they continue to confirm the problems that we have. So, having these habits where we talk to AI, where we use AI excessively, ends up creating these problems that we don't even realize. And more than that, we've also seen major issues with hatred in the same way, where if you ask AI about something related towards either another group, a stigma, an idea that you have that is either racially motivated or brought up by, say, a collective memory where you paint another culture as the victim or the hero in a situation, you end up creating significantly more propaganda and hatred toward that group through AI. We've also seen this through the way AI has been used as a tool, say through deep fakes or through information that gets put out that's solely false. We see core misuses of a tool that could be solving so much. But on the flip side, it does help quite a bit with these issues. UK research and innovation found in the past couple of years that AI is able to track and help solve hate crimes, solving one of the major harms that it's begun to cause. So, the real question is, with a tool that can be used for something so harmful and something so helpful in our society today that can harm ourselves and can also help the people around us, how do we use it effectively and how can it help us change our habits? So I'd like to begin with a quick habitual analysis. If Shirley could send another Mendy link into the chat, and everyone can just answer whichever of these three questions they'd like. First off, what fuels your habits? What charges what you do today, what you do in and out? Secondarily, what future do the habits that you participate in create? And third, how does change in oneself, changing a habit, changing an activity you do, inspire change in society? And can it do something like that? Now, I'll give us a couple of minutes with the time we have remaining to answer some of these questions, and then we'll move forward. The link should be in the chat now. Okay, if everyone feels like they're ready, if anyone would like to share anything that we have, or we can just read responses off of the Mendy link here. Okay, should we just read some of the responses?
Sure, I can read them out. So we have two. So the first one says, how easy it is, and how easy it is ends up feeling what I do. Yeah, that's the first one.
Mhm.
And then the second one is, I think we tend to be terribly routine beings, therefore, undisturbed, we would be boring and repetitive. AI could promote this. We need to interact with other people slash cultures to see other ways of being. That's,
Yeah,
yeah.
so I completely agree with both of those. It's something we've seen in the past and something we see now with AI. Like the second entry ended up stating, it ends up exacerbating these issues. When we become like beings of habit, beings of routine, we see the same things happen again and again. And if the tools that we use promote that, we'll never end up seeing change. So that actually brings me right into our next topic, resolutions. So I'm sure, at least in American culture, New Year's resolutions are a very, very big deal. I think it comes up every year with my family where, like, oh, we'll bring up what kind of New Year's resolution do you want? What type of year do you want to be moving into? And yet, it's very, very common that these resolutions don't actually occur, and these resolutions end up becoming either unrealistic or can't make change. So, Dr. Mike Evans ended up creating a study and a process that shows how resolutions and change can either build on each other or can actually happen. The first step to everything, according to his study, is identification. If we keep clear goals and we make sure to set a time frame, it increases success odds by nearly 10 times. But it's important to not take things to such a large degree. He says that the most important part is making small scale change that you can facilitate within yourself, not relying on some other source and not making it so large that it's hard to break out of that routine you've already put yourself into. And what he said that I think connects back to what everyone responded to in the first couple of questions is that our habits get in the way of change. And the only way for us to make change is to make sure our habits are per se okay with that change we're trying to make, that they can work together to shape ourselves into something new, to then shape society into what we want to see. So, I would like for each of you, we don't need to do a response for this with the time remaining, but just to think to yourself, what can you resolve to do this week that can make a change in one of the habits you either don't want to see in yourself or don't want to see in society? I think a proverb that I heard a lot growing up is that you have to start change with yourself. You can't go from the largest being in the world. You can't go from making societal change and then trickling down into individual. You need to start with yourself. And for that reason, if each of us could resolve to do one thing this week to make us better, to make the people around us better, we can see actual change overall. Now, to bring us back together, what have we gone over today? We started with storytelling, with the dystopias that we've seen in pop culture and how those connect to what society could begin to look like. We then saw through grace the systems that end up being created and how these systems promote or help change these dystopias. Shirley brought up how culture ends up promoting ideals that then bring us back into these situations, and how it can be hard to make solutions when not everyone can agree on what's actually occurred. And finally, we ended off with how we can really make change, starting within yourself and seeing how we can move forward, trying to make small changes, moving away from the confirmation bias that we see in society today from AI, from other sources, and instead moving towards personal change, towards what the people in front of us, the people in the mirror that we want to see tomorrow. So, the question I'd like to leave you all with is that if we begin to make change, who gets to imagine the future now? And I would like to posit that it would be each of us. If we can make change within ourselves, that then makes change in society. Okay. Thank you all so much for coming. I do believe we have a little bit of time left. So if we wanted to do like questions, anything of that sort, please feel free.
You can switch to the next slide. There's
Oh, okay, great.
questions. Yeah, if anyone has any questions they want to ask us or share any feedbacks on the session today or any takeaways they have, it's an open-ended conversation.
Actually, if I can jump in, I was thinking during this about the idea of if these stories are wrong or lies or disproven, how do we end up coping with that? Um, in the relationship of AI, I think there's the problem of, well, there's AI slop and then there's AI hallucinations and all of those sorts of phenomenon that take place. And so, and we're also the post-truth issues that we're all dealing with. How do we, I wonder how these can be incorporated into the discussion you all have been providing us with, and maybe if there's any ways forward or ways to get through it in all of your opinions.
I mean, I think I've found personally that with any like story or basis that my life and my actions gets based on, if that gets proved wrong or something gets proved like different than what I thought it to be, it becomes very hard to change because all of my actions are very deep-seated in that original belief. So I think it becomes a lot more of a question of trying to find ways to like shift how you view what you're doing. And instead of changing what you're doing, trying to figure out a new way to think about it. I'm not truly sure what that would look like, but it can be very hard to restructure the entirety of oneself if a basic idea that we based ourselves around gets disproven.
Yeah, and then similar for me as well. I think it's more about, in a sense, strengthening your own sets of values and what you truly view as integral to your own identity, because I think it ties into identity as well. Because with almost everything else that happens in our lives, it's quite unstable in a sense to imagine that the society or the value systems that we have nowadays is going to be sustainable forever. I think we're currently realizing that it's not sustainable forever, and a lot of times we're experiencing, with AI being the hot topic now, a reconceptualization of what work, the future of work might look like, the future of education. How does it fit in with all of our previous beliefs about us as human beings? So I think to add on to what Eli was saying, I think it's very important, at least from like an individual level, to develop your own set of values and to define what you see as integral to yourself, and that makes you you, right?
All right. We're running short on time, so I'm gonna wrap up this session. Everybody here did real good, so congratulations for this. So um as we wrap up this inspiring session, thank you all for being part of World's Futures Day, Join Voices. Your perspective and participation have made this conversation truly meaningful. The journey doesn't end here. New facilitators and fresh conversations begin at the top of each hour. You're all welcome to stay and continue exploring future possibilities with us. If you enjoyed today, this kind of learning doesn't stop here. It continues to teach the Futures Global Online Youth Futures community. Right now, we are offering the following learning experience. Campaigns for Change builds awards-winning projects using Futures literacy skills. Join Voices FutureWise Institute. We apply this learning directly to your active projects and Futures initiatives. As part of World's Futures Day, there is a special discount code to register. If you're not ready to take part in a learning experience yet, you can still stay connected. We'd love to hear about your experience, share your feedback, and receive your badge of participation. Please fill out the survey. I'll share the links to this chat now. Well, breakout rooms